Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network, all NASCAR, all the time on this very channel. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, Chris Werme. And Wormser, we put together a show rundown each and every week we do this program. We have a pretty good idea of what most of our talking points will be, a little bit of back and forth in terms of how we want to delineate between Stage 1, Stage 2, and Stage 3. But NASCAR proves to be the gift that keeps on giving as we record here on a Wednesday. And Stage 1 is going to blend into Stage 3. Stage 2 will remain unchanged, but how about NASCAR dropping the hammer on Austin Dillon? Your win is going to stand, but it's not going to automatically qualify you for a berth in the NASCAR postseason.
Yeah, that invisible line that Denny Hamlin's talking about was just moved again. I guess I have to applaud him, and we're going to get into this. We're going to probably save more of it towards the end.
Yeah, it's a little bit more of a sports talk radio topic, but we will relate it all back to gambling and how it may impact some of our decision-making going forward.
Go
ahead, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it absolutely does affect some of the gambling stuff moving forward, so we just kind of want to outline that. But what a crazy week. Did not see the 3-car passing the 22 and the 11 over the long run. I didn't see that on my bingo card, that's for sure. Wow, what a week for NASCAR social media. It's been I've been glued to Twitter.
There's no doubt. There's been plenty of great content there coming from NASCAR, coming from the leading personalities, the most outspoken drivers as well. For those folks who are tuning into the Stay Green podcast for the very first time, the first question I have to ask is, where have you been all season long as we continue to ride along absolutely white hot with some of our best bets that we're sharing on this program and some of the information that we pass along on race day. But Stage 1, all about the racing recap, and we'll cover some of the things we learned and identified for Richmond with a unique option tire and how that could impact the way that we handicap the postseason going forward. Stage 2, it's a Michigan preview as we head to the Irish Hills of Brooklyn, Michigan, and who the drivers we believe are worth watching on this 2-mile high-speed oval. And as we kind of tipped our hand, Stage 3 will revisit some of the on-track shenanigans in NASCAR coming down with the iron fist in terms of Austin Dillon and what that means to you as NASCAR bettors to wrap things up. So if we go back to Stage 1, Worm, I mean, you mentioned it. Austin Dillon, before the caution comes out with 2 laps to go, thank you, Ricky Stenhouse, for creating a little bit of drama, had the best car. Drove himself to the front, was going to win this race, no questions asked. It's a track where he has been underappreciated and undervalued. You, of course, didn't identify him as the driver to put on your card to try and get your wife the couch that she so covets.
Yep.
But we have to tip our hat to RCR, a much maligned organization all season that hasn't been very much in the thick of things. Austin Dillon hadn't finished in the top 3 in a race since the Bristol Dirt way back in 2023. Kyle Busch has been an afterthought, but holy hell, the 3-car put together a run for the ages, eventually gets to victory lane, but not without plenty of controversy. But from an on-track perspective, what did you see from RCR that really took you by surprise?
Well, obviously the win was shocking. And if I were to tell you that RCR was going to get a win at Richmond let's just say that there wasn't the caution and Austin Dillon wins just by this thing staying green, which he easily could have. If I were to tell you that an RCR car was going to go up there and pass the 11 and pass the 22, would you have said, oh, that's for sure Austin Dillon? No, you would have thought Kyle Busch. And I think that's why, looking at practice and the lap times, Austin's been good here in the past. I think it was back in 2020 in COVID where he led a lot of laps and was arguably one of the fastest cars. But at that point, Tyler Reddick was also fast, and when he was with RCR. So to go through practice times or to go through the race and see the 3 car be fast, but the 8 car and Kyle Busch not be fast was almost like I thought maybe Austin's practice was fluky, because he did start quick in practice as well. So happy for, I guess, Austin Dillon to run well. I don't know what else to say. Like, can't be happy for the win, especially in the manner in which it happened. But I think, unfortunately, the end of the race is going to overshadow the hell of a race that team ran. They didn't make mistakes on pit road. They were flawless with strategy. And Austin Dillon did a hell of a job navigating lap cars and running down 2 of the very best at Richmond that have ever done it. So kind of a bummer to see the race end the way it did. But I think if you're RCR, you still have to go, hey, we're racing for the win. I mean, that's something they haven't been racing for top 10s. So they have to feel good heading into at least the latter half of the season.
More of a bummer for RCR given Wednesday's news. The win will stand, but it does not automatically qualify the 3 car for a spot at the table in terms of being one of the 16 vying for a championship. What was your overall thought on the softer tire compound that NASCAR elected to use? From a gambling standpoint, we saw Daniel Suarez go to the Reds before anybody else, made up a ton of track position and was able to hang on to a lot of it. Do we think this is something that is going to continue at some of the short tracks, or is this more a byproduct of a soft tire with a track known for tire degradation that created a perfect storm to allow NASCAR to tinker and get closer to where we want to go, that we want a tire to degrade faster than the fuel tank, forcing drivers into a little bit of a rock and a hard place?
Again, I think this is another huge positive that was overshadowed. The red was an extreme success. I don't even know what NASCAR thought would happen. I had a prediction that even someone restarting 8th wouldn't work their way to the front. Well, that was completely wrong. You could restart 20th and drive to the front. So I was pleasantly surprised there. I think this goes to show NASCAR, and more importantly, Goodyear, that a soft tire can work in this sport. I know that they just are, in the past, are just worried about, I think, courting and what we saw at Bristol, where let's just say you could only make it 20 laps if it got to that point, where, or what we've seen at Indy in the past, where they had to refund tickets. They don't ever want to be the storyline in a negative way for a race. And that's rarely the case when the tires are too hard and not falling off. No, not a lot of people, other than I would say huge fans of the sports, don't understand how important the tire is. So I think that they just err on the side of cautiousness, but I think it's a huge success. I don't think we need 2 tires in the sport. I don't think that that's the type of racing that NASCAR wants. I think that they just proved that the softer tire can work. Now it's time for Goodyear to go be able to produce a tire. It's not like you just snap your fingers and you just have hundreds of these tires laying around. I know if there was an issue with the time in which they were produced, if you had tires that were a couple months old, all of a sudden those were not as grippy as newer tires. So hopefully they can ramp up production, and then come Martinsville or Phoenix, we do see some fall off and we see some more passing, and a huge success. So as much as the end of the race has really kind of cast this shadow, there were so many positive things that just aren't being talked about that would have been had the ending been a little different.
Anything else really stand out to you? I know we've been pounding the drum for the model of consistency that the 45 car has become this season. Tyler Reddick, yet again, another outstanding run. Now 9 top 10s over his last 10 races, the only outlier, a 22nd place finish at Iowa. 70% of the races that we have run so far on the Cup schedule, points paying that is, he's been able to finish inside the top 10, far and away the series best. The one caveat is he just hasn't won a lot of races, hasn't led a ton of laps, but we continue to see odds on the 45 to win the championship shrink every single week. As
they should. It's interesting. The 45 usually looks decent in practice. He typically gets into the kind of the fast 10 to qualify for the pole. And then he just doesn't make a lot of mistakes early or mid in the race. Now, he has made some mistakes late in the race, but those mistakes haven't cost him, a top 10 finish. They've cost him the win. So if he were to kind of a few things were to go his way, whether it was at Chicago or some of these other places where he's had a chance to win, impressive by him. First, also I don't know how we got third.
I'm still trying to figure that out, by the way. Did the caution must have come out, and that's how Denny Hamlin, at the time of the caution, when they froze the running order, finished second? Because watching it in real time, I thought Tyler Reddick finished second and Bubba Wallace finished third. The reason why that was relevant, I know some of our listeners out there who can't help themselves, we give out a top 10. They decide they want to ladder up. So I had folks that have Bubba top 3, top 5, and top 10 who thought they'd hit the bonanza. And I had to kind of correct them about 90 minutes after the race when I checked the finish and went, nope, Bubba finished 4th. So you cashed 2 out of your 3 tickets. But I was trying to figure that out in real time myself.
The crazy thing is about that is how long was Denny in second place? Because he was in second place for less than a second. And if that's where they froze it, because he was leading, he went from leading to second place for 0.5 of a second.
Maybe they should have froze it with Denny in first. Denny being sideways gets the win.
There's a world or a scenario where if they go back and look, there's a scenario that I could have seen where if the caution was thrown, Denny was the leader and Denny gets the win. Now, I don't know that could have happened, but it seems more plausible than the fact he was in second place for, half a tenth. So
not gonna argue with you as much as I want to. I can't.
Yeah. The other team that you just have to look at and talking about Bubba, you have to applaud what this 23 team has done the last few weeks. They've done exactly what they needed to do. They picked up stage points. They haven't shot themselves in the foot. And, the last 2 weeks to finish in the top 5, I think has just been a great job by Bubba and this whole team. It's always been, I always thought that Bubba was kind of holding himself back, but it seems like this year he's a little bit more mature, and I think it's going to pay dividends. I think he gets in the playoffs. It's obviously a huge day for him to get the 3 car out of the playoffs, leaves another spot for points as of now. So I guess, and then Chris Bell with clearly the fastest car. None of this is even talked about if Chris Bell just doesn't speed on the last pit stop. I think he just kind of cruises, even if there is that caution with 2 to go. I guess tinfoil hats. Ricky Stenhouse trying to get back at RCR. Finds out Austin Dillon's leading. Anyway, I won't go there. I think Bell wins that race because he would have had probably 5 or 6 second lead coming down pit road, takes 4 tires, wins the race off.
One other thing I want to highlight, and I'm not sure if it just ends up being an outlier or it's something that maybe they figured out over the 2-week summer break. Trackhouse, a lot more competitive than what we've seen. We mentioned Daniel Suarez going to the prime tires. Ross Chastain quietly comes home in 5th. He was a driver that you and I discussed at great lengths between us Sunday morning. Do we want to fade him in some of his matchups? Yeah. Where do we think he'll finish? Ultimately didn't do so. But also when we look at the 99 in general over the last 8 races, and while this isn't Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson territory, in 6 of those 8 races, he's finished 16th or better. So maybe Team Trackhouse starting to identify a little bit of speed. We'll see if it's something to monitor going forward, knowing how those drivers are typically priced. We'll wave the green-white checkered flag on stage 1. Encourage you to follow Chris on social media at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, both NASCAR, college football, NFL related, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, as we pivot into stage 2 and talk about a preview of Michigan, I'm not sure. Do we call this your home track? Is Phoenix your home track? Do you claim both of them? Where do you come
Portland,
down on
now
that?
that I live in the Northwest?
You're not claiming Portland. It's an Xfinity road course. That's completely out of the discussion.
Okay. This I would say Michigan. I've been there back when before it was repaved, when it was a good race. Sure, we can call this my home track. I don't know. Phoenix, I guess, is my home. This would be my home away from home track.
All right. So when we talk Michigan, before we get into the drivers to follow or fade, track specs, 2-mile, low tire wear, intermediate track. Used to race here twice a year up until 2021. Started coming here once a year. Track comps, depending on who you talk to, people used to love comparing this to Auto Club. I'm not sure why. It was basically just because it was 2 miles. Other than that, I saw absolutely no similarities. The other track that often gets mentioned in the same breath would be Kansas, but we talked before starting this very fine program. You had some interesting things to say about why you feel that Kansas provides a little bit of an inaccurate comp as that track in the Wizard of Oz essentially continues to show a little bit more tire wear.
Yeah, it used to be Kansas used to be mini Michigan, but Kansas now has completely changed. I think the track has evolved to where you're seeing much more tire wear at Kansas. You see multiple grooves, and you do not see that at Michigan. You see one groove, and last year you saw one guy that could pass in the bottom, and it was quite obvious who the fastest car was. He was the only guy that was capable of doing that. So this is a one groove racetrack, lots of on throttle time. Momentum is going to be key to making passes. If you lose any sort of momentum, you're probably going to get passed, and it's going to take you 3-4 laps to build that momentum back up. So unfortunately, no tire wear. That lends itself to a fuel mileage race.
Your favorite, buddy. You love a good fuel race on a Sunday afternoon.
There's nothing worse than a track where you come down and get fuel only under caution. Like that to me is just a recipe for a race that I don't want any part of, but we're going to see it. And it's so funny. Greg Stucker, is that who it is?
Greg Stucker from Goodyear Racing.
Yep. Called Michigan a real racers racetrack, which is just gaslighting us. It is not. You're almost holding this thing all out all the way around for a lot of the first few laps anyway. You're just going to have this thing matted. They brought us the same tire as Las Vegas, or left side tire as Las Vegas, Texas, Kansas, and Nashville, and Pocono. We saw very little fall off at Texas and Nashville or Pocono. So I don't anticipate a lot of fall off. Hopefully the right side has a little bit more than there's been in the past, but ultimately this is not my favorite racetrack. I do think that there will be an edge or two, but I'm definitely looking forward to Darlington coming up here in a couple of weeks.
Well, we got a little ways to go till we get to Darlington, because if you don't love Michigan, I can't imagine you're going to have a full race card on the docket when we go to Daytona a week from this coming Saturday. But let's get to Michigan first. And as we always do, we break down the driver lineup into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So we can start with Tier 1, all drivers priced in the single digits, depending on where you shop. Denny Hamlin as low as 5-1, upwards of 6.5-1. We'll call Kyle Larson, Tyler Reddick, and Ryan Blaney, all very much in that 6.5, upwards of 8. Again, these numbers subject to change like always. And when we look at Denny Hamlin, he now has a second-place finish in 2 of the last 3 races, given the absurd ending that we saw at Richmond. He's amongst the series leaders in wins, top 3s, and top 5s this season. Led 289 laps over his last 6 races. Clearly, speed hasn't been the problem. And when we talk Denny Hamlin at Michigan, top average speed rank during the next-gen era, back-to-back podium finishes here as well. But interestingly enough, has only led 39 laps over those 2 trips, but 6 straight finishes here of 6th or better. And last year's driver rating of 102.5 was actually the first time in 6 trips he had a driver rating below 110. So Denny Hamlin checks a lot of the boxes, at least for me, Werme, as being a worthy favorite this weekend.
Yeah, I think oddsmakers got this right, making him a favorite, a heavier favorite over Larson. Denny's going to be strong. I think, I was discussing with a NASCAR fan yesterday that he's just a guy that if you need a win, you got to go to Denny. He's the guy that can just go out there and win, whether his car's good or bad. He's going to give himself a chance to win. And yeah, I think 6.5. I don't like anything really kind of in this 6 or lower range, but if you do, there might have been some 7s early on, but 6.5, I don't think is a terrible number. I don't see that number closing 8 or 9 after practice and qualifying. We haven't seen Denny's price get boosted up after practice and qualifying. So if you think that Denny, or you're going to want Denny in your card, I don't oppose getting into the market here at that 6.5 number. Anything less than 6, I think you can go ahead and wait.
Makes a ton of sense. And one prominent book actually has Denny as a slight underdog in his head-to-head qualifying matchup with his teammate Christopher Bell, who we'll get to in a few moments. Mentioned Kyle Larson, Tyler Reddick, and Ryan Blaney. When we talk Kyle Larson, hasn't shown as much speed as we've grown accustomed to from the 5 recently. He's led just 25 laps over his last 6 races, and the 17 of those 25 laps came last weekend at Richmond. I'm not even going to say they were a byproduct of raw speed. It had a lot more to do with strategy and him being on and off sequence, allowing him to get to the lead. But we know Kyle Larson, 4 wins on his resume, 7 top 3s, 9 top 5s, has him second in the series behind Reddick. And we talk about Michigan, 5th in speed ranking in 2022, outside the top 10 last year, but 7th or better in each of his last 4 trips. Led 70 laps here back in 2021. Tyler Reddick, a little bit of a different storyline, Worm, because this track, when you look at history, wouldn't suggest that his number should be this short, but we did see him open as much as 10-1 at some national books. That price has come down. He's finished 24th or worse now in 4 straight races at Michigan, the best career driver rating he has on his resume. In the Irish Hills, 80.6, did lead 7 laps here last year, the first time he's ever led laps at Michigan International Speedway. And then there's Ryan Blaney, 11th or better over his last 5 races. Average finish during that span is 6.2. Didn't factor into a lot of the decisions last week, kind of underwhelmed and was a little bit of an afterthought, but top 10 finishes in 4 of his last 5 trips to Michigan, but hasn't scored a stage point here during the next gen era. When we talk those 3 drivers right behind Denny Hamlin, what stands out to you, kind sir?
This is a place where you'd think Larson is going to be the favorite. And when you see a 7-1 price tag next to him, you're like, oh, well, that's got to be an auto play, but he just hasn't had the same speed. And I think that the difference between this track and a lot of other ones is you kind of catch a setup or you don't. And it's hard to race your way or find grip when you're pretty much in one lane. So after this race sort of gets strung out after restarts, you might be able to make up a position or 2, but it's not like you're going to be searching around trying to find speed, running a different line. And that's where Kyle Larson is good. If Larson unloads fast, 7-1 is a hell of a price because he'll probably be out front. He won't need to find speed. He'll be just out there in clean air. So it all depends on how this 5 team unloads, whether 7-1 is going to be a good number. When it comes to Tyler Reddick, I think he opened as high as 14, and you just can't open Tyler Reddick at 14 right now. He's just, I don't want to call him the closer and Kevin Harvick, but he just kind of around at the end. He at least is putting himself in position to win races. Couple that with this is a track where Reddick has had some success in the past. Yeah, I think that Tyler probably should be in that 7.5 to 1, 8 to 1 range. I don't think he's going off shorter than that. So at this point, under 10 to 1, no reason to go rush and bet Tyler Reddick. Ryan Blaney, again, will open kind of that 7, 8 to 1 range, which I think is pretty fair. He did show a lot of speed at Indy and Pocono, which I think are very setup driven as well, with a mixed in with a little bit more strategy than I think we'll see this weekend. Yeah, definitely an afterthought at Richmond, but this is going to be a little bit different. This is a lot of on throttle time. The 12 car's fast in these situations, but 7-1's pretty short for me to get involved with a driver that doesn't win as much as some of the other guys that are similarly priced.
When we trend into tier 2, it's almost like 10s and 12s are wild when you start talking about Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr., Christopher Bell, and Brad Kay. As far as Chase Elliott, we've talked about the 9 car plenty this season, 3 straight top 10 finishes, but none better than 9th, actually ended a run of 3 straight finishes, 18th or worse. He has been the model of consistency, but rarely in the discussion for race wins. His 10.4 average finish this season remains the series best, but you dig into some of those underlying numbers, just 4 top 3s on the podium, 7 top 5s, 12 top 10s, more than 50% of the races. And he's led only 184 laps all season, other than New Hampshire. Hasn't led more than 5 laps in a race since his win at Texas. And even when you consider New Hampshire, qualifying for that race was rained out, led 41 laps and never showed race-winning speed to get back to the pole. As far as his history at Michigan, back-to-back finishes outside the top 10, but prior to that had 4 straight finishes inside the top 10. And this is a guy that you can usually count on to be in the mix. Martin Truex Jr., if he didn't have bad luck this season, wouldn't have any luck at all, especially recently. Whether it's late race cautions, whether it's engines expiring, something that can go wrong often has for the 19th. 24th or worse now in 4 of his last 5 races, has led just 14 laps over his last 7, all of those coming at Pocono. And when you look at some of the top tier stats, just 2 podium finishes and 4 top 5s. But in terms of Michigan, maybe this can be the salve for all wounds. His average speed rank here during the next gen era, right behind that of his teammate Denny Hamlin, led the field in that particular metric last year. top 10 here in the last 7 straight races, 6 of those finishes, 6th or better, and he led 47 laps in last year's race and won each of the first 2 stages. We'll get into some of the other drivers, but are you buying or selling Chase Elliott and the 19 of Martin Truex Jr.?
Yeah, I think Chase is a little overvalued at this point. Thought he looked decent last week at Richmond, and it never really a factor. However, where I do think that there's potential upside for this 9 team would be they did have some success in passing at both Indy and Pocono, kind of a victim of a pit road violation-esque at Indy, and didn't really recover the rest of the day, but was out there out front and very fast. So I feel like they have to be optimistic coming into this weekend that they're going to have some speed. You just haven't seen him go up and take anything away from anybody yet. So although Chase is on my radar as a potential, value driver for matchups, I don't see him as someone that's going to be contending for the win unless some crazy strategy he gets involved with that it tends to work out. Man, Truex, probably one of the fastest cars I've ever seen that lost straight up again to Chris Buescher. He restarted, I want to say like 13th or 14th at the end of stage 2, or towards the end of stage 2, and then drove and beat Daniel Suarez. I mean, this car was a rocket ship last year. I thought it was merely a formality that he would pass the 17, but I mean, hats off to Chris Buescher. That was a hell of a drive to get that car into victory lane. I think Truex is going to be strong. I don't think that engine reliability should be an issue, but it's probably just sitting in the back of the minds of a few drivers in Ty Gibbs and Martin Truex Jr. But yeah, I think Truex caught the setup last year, and there's going to be another driver that catches a setup like that. And if they do, they can go down and take 4 tires every time and just drive back to the front. And if they unload again like they did last year, I expect him to be in the mix. If Truex is in the mix, I also think that Denny Hamlin's in the mix. That's who he'll be racing. And probably Chris Bell, for that matter, as all of JGR, with the exception of Ty Gibbs, has kind of been running kind of up front together. So I expect JGR to be fast, and Truex, if they have that same setup as last year and other teams didn't adjust properly, he will be fast again.
And you mentioned Christopher Bell, still looking for his first career top 10 finish at Michigan, 13th and 26th in the next gen era after starting top 2 in each of the previous races. So stringing together 1 fast lap has not been an issue. An accident ended his day in 2022 after finishing top 5 in both stages. So with a little bit of fortune, those finishing results could look a little bit better. Led just 1 lap last year after starting on the pole and not picking up any stage points. So he fell back pretty quickly. Brad Kay, we know how important it would be to the 6 car to drive himself into victory lane for his home track. Something that eludes him on his pretty impressive career resume. Led 55 laps across Pocono and the Brickyard, so the setup that he was able to land on there showed some speed. Led 15 laps here last year before coming home in 4th place. The driver rating, here last season was his best since 2020. 11 straight races. He's now scored stage points at Michigan International Speedway. So when you look at Brad Kay or Christopher Bell, strong sentiments on either of those 2 drivers before we start talking his teammate and Christopher Buescher, William Byron, Joey Logano, and company.
Yeah, I think Chris Bell will qualify well. Last year, actually, he kind of spun out and hit the wall towards the latter half, I think, of stage 1. And I think I want to bring this up is I would say some people can compare this racetrack to Texas because it's a lot of on throttle time, and you also just see snappy loose underneath. So just keep that in mind. That's what happened to Chris Bell. It happened to a few other drivers at this track where you're trying to pass somebody and someone crosses in front of your nose, you lose that downforce, and the next thing you know, you find yourself into the wall. That's what happened with Chris Bell last year. If you want to get in on Chris Bell, I think that's you have to look at maybe just qualifying matchups and or bets to win the pole. I do think that Bell will be fast. He's clearly figured something out when it comes to qualifying here, but he hasn't really hung around, and it seems like this track's just a little too edgy for him. So you're going to make sure you get paid properly on Chris Bell, and I don't know. It seems like he's a little bit too much of a wild card at this point when you throw in some of the mistakes he's made on pit road. Brad Keselowski, I think if this was a 1.5 mile track, I'd like him a little bit more. I think that RFK has shown some of the best speed on, 1.5 mile tracks. I don't know that it's going to translate as much to the 2 mile track. However, Brad in that entire 16 does a great job of getting him out front, or at least in the top 5, and steal some track position. So I anticipate they'll do more of the same. It'll be some sort of aggressive strategy if he qualifies poorly, which I kind of anticipate, to just get him up front. And I think that qualifying really hurts, and there's no reason to get involved with either RFK driver at this point in the week because their odds go off higher than they open. So, Brad's kind of in that 12-1 range. We've seen Buescher, who we'll get to in a second. He opened at 20, has kind of dropped down to like the 16 range. But those guys have just punted in qualifying. So I anticipate more of the same from those two guys. And it'll have to be strategy and hopefully race pace to get them back up to the front. So with that, I think you just wait till after practice and qualifying.
Steeman, Willie Beeman, William Byron coming in that 14 to 16 range thereabouts. Pair of top 10 finishes over his last 6 races. Uneventful 13th is probably the best way that I could describe what we saw from him last weekend at Richmond.
I don't even know what color car he was in.
Yeah, was never really in the mix, didn't pay attention to him, etc. We look at his season-long numbers, 3 victories, but none since Martinsville that came back the 8th race of the season. 6 top 3s, but a pair of top 3s over his last 14 races, so hasn't exactly been trending up. Hasn't led a single lap since the Coke 600 at Charlotte Memorial Day weekend. When we look at Michigan history, the last 4 races at the Brooklyn track, Byron has an average finish of 9th, 7th best amongst active drivers, just 1 top 10 over his last 5 trips here. Didn't finish last year because of the damaged vehicle policy, and 20 total laps led here going back to his first race in 2018. Meanwhile, Joey Logano, pair of top 5s over his last 6 races, should have included another top 5 at minimum at Richmond.
Yeah, maybe even a win.
And possibly a win before the chaos. Still just a pair of podium finishes and 4 top 5s this season. When we talk about Michigan history, 3 top 10s over his last 5 trips and 4th during the next-gen era. Stage points in each of the last 4 trips here, but hasn't led a lap here since 2020. And you talk Chris Buescher. Pressure on now to make the playoffs, although that road gets to be a little bit more fortuitous with Austin Dillon not automatically entered into that field of 16. Michigan history. Started 4th here last year, drove into victory lane, completing that back-to-back with his win at Richmond. Led 52 laps in the victory. Had come to Michigan previously, having led just 1 lap. Broke an 8-race streak of finishing 15th or worse during that span. Buescher, Logano, William Byron, the floor is yours, kind sir.
Byron is just, gosh, if this race had been like the 8th race of the season, I think you have to make him the favorite. And now just kind of been an afterthought these last 6, 7, 8 weeks, just not racing up front and finding trouble, poor strategy. It's been kind of a cluster since the early wins and success he had in the season. You would think this would be a good track for him, but it just hasn't been. And I don't know if that speaks to just the driving style required here at Michigan, but I'm not very high on William Byron this week. Again, anyone can catch a setup. Every driver that we've discussed, if they do unload quick and it looks like they have speed built in their race car and they have a little bit of maneuverability, you don't need a lot. There's only one groove. So if you can run the bottom and the one main groove, you'll be able to make passes and you'll be in a situation where Truex found himself last year. Hopefully you can just get this thing done. Byron could do that. I just haven't seen anything recently. There was nothing at Indy that, kind of stood out. There was nothing at Pocono that stood out. Can't really glean much from Richmond other than the last 2 times that the last 2 winners of Richmond have also gone on to win at Michigan. I do not see Austin Dillon winning, if that's what you're asking.
You didn't see it happening last week either, and the Austin Dillon shoved it right in your pie hole.
Yeah, I know. I don't have high hopes for Byron, but he could. I don't think there's any reason to get involved at this price. Logano, I just feel like 12-1 is where they open Logano when they have no idea what to expect. He's
a guy that can drift.
He can drift. Yeah, he's a guy that could go off at 6-1 if he looks strong in practice and qualifies well, or he could go off at 19-1 if he qualifies 23rd and is just out to lunch on their setup. So I don't really have an opinion on Logano. I do think if the Fords are fast for whatever reason, I still think Blaney will be faster, and I think both RFK cars will be faster. So if the Fords are fast, I still kind of have Logano as the fourth fastest Ford when the Fords have speed. Now, Richmond's a complete outlier. It has nothing to do with this track. So I don't know. Logano, I would say wait, because he's also a guy you can take at 8-1 if he looks good in practice and says he likes his car. Chris Buescher, still need to see some more out of qualifying from him. It seems every week that I'm talking about him before the race saying, well, if he can ever get track position, I think he could be good. We did see a little speed out of him last week in practice, but did not have the speed we saw speed on him last week in qualifying, but nothing that really transferred over to the race. Impressive run, though, last year. I think whenever you're coming back to a track where you won the previous year, you're capable. And it wasn't like he stole the race. He held off the fastest car I've seen not win a race. So I think that the 17 team has to be excited to at least get back into these intermediate tracks, because I think RFK has shown much more speed at those than they have the short tracks. So for the people that got Buescher at, the 20 or 16-1, I think that's probably getting your money in good, but anything shorter than that, I think you wait till after practice and qualifying.
When we trend into tier 3, we look at Ty Gibbs, Bubba Wallace, Alex Bowman. You have to drop more or less off a cliff before you get to the pair of Trackhouse teammates in Ross Chastain, Daniel Suarez, and of course your beloved Kyle Busch. As terms of making cases for some of these drivers, I know we were high on Bubba Wallace last week. He did not disappoint with a top 5 finish, continuing to gain a little bit of momentum as we get deeper into the season as he tries to secure a path to the postseason. Ty Gibbs, right now, just one top 10 finish over his last 9 races, and that came in a third-place result at the Chicago Street Course. His average finish during the span is outside the top 20, and we're seeing his lead in the playoff race continue to shrink by the day. As far as Alex Bowman, we can say a lot of positives about the 48, can race with the weight of the world off his shoulders right now, but this has not exactly been a track that Alex Bowman circles when the schedule comes out and goes, you know what? If we're going to find a win this year, it's going to be when we take our car to the 2-mile oval at Michigan International Speedway.
Yeah, I think that's just maybe all of Chevy in general. I think this has been a Ford and Toyota place in the past, especially since I think probably the repave. If Bowman's going to be fast, you would think that Larson and Elliott and Byron are going to be faster. So even if Bowman's fast, he's at best the 4th fastest car. So yeah, I would steer clear of Bowman. Again, he's another guy that doesn't matter what he really does in practice and qualifying. His odds don't move that much. Bubba Wallace, I'm high on Bubba. I think that this is a place where he's come out and led laps. Toyotas have speed. He typically qualifies well. And I think they're in a bit of a groove. I like what I've seen out of Bubba, and I've been as critical of Bubba as anybody. Well, maybe not as anybody, but because there's some hate out there for Bubba, which just is unwarranted. And I just look at it for track performance, and he's done exactly what's been asked of him, and I've been impressed by him. So he's a guy that I'm beginning to trust to kind of, if it looks like he has a let's just say a 4th to 7th place car, he's going to get that 4th to 7th place finish. Whereas you could take a look at a guy like Ty Gibbs, who might look like he has a 4th to 7th place car, but he's going to come in 13th or 14th and maybe not get the best finish for that team. So I like Bubba. This is a track that they probably have circled. This is a place where they do have an opportunity to win. I think 25-1 is, I don't think that's a terrible bet at all. I think he'll qualify in the top 10, and you could see that number come down a little bit. Ty Gibbs, this is another place where he probably could get a win. Again, he's going to have to unload fast, but I just don't see. I think of Ty kind of similarly to Alex Bowman, whereas if the Toyotas are going to be fast, gosh, you got to think that there's going to be faster Toyotas than Ty Gibbs. You got to put Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., and Chris Bell probably ahead of him. So even if Ty Gibbs and the Toyotas look really fast, he's still probably at best the 4th fastest car. So couple that with just some inconsistency, and I would say Ty is probably still overvalued at that 22-1 price. Can they catch a setup? Absolutely. Any one of these guys can catch a setup and I think go out there and lead laps. I don't know if they can win the race. Maybe Bubba's the only of the three here that I think is probably capable of winning the race. But all of these guys in that kind of mid 20-1 range, I like Bubba. I like Bubba the most.
Ty's a guy, too, to your point, that can go out there, look great and sporty in practice, qualify inside the top 5, and if anything, it'll create some opportunity to bet against him in some of his head-to-head matchups against some of those Tier 2 and Tier 3 drivers that he'll inevitably be matched up with as we get closer to race day. So kind of covered all the drivers in as much detail as we can provide around these fine parts. So we'll wave the green, white checkered flag and put a bow on stage 2. Again, follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. And for all things Bet the Board Podcast Network related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And stage 3, Worm, normally it's about things that we've noticed, ways that we can make our audience smarter and more sophisticated as NASCAR bettors. But this will take on a little bit of a sports talk radio tone, and we'll try and look at it through a betting lens. So we go back and we revisit what we saw unfold at Richmond with Austin Dillon. I think the dialogue would have been much different had we recorded this show a couple hours earlier on Wednesday before NASCAR came out with the hammer, deciding that they were going to honor the win for the 3-car, but they were going to remove his automatic qualification for the playoffs, going to dock him some playoff points, and use it as a deterrent to try and take away drivers just doing dumb shit to get their cars into victory lane. Now, we know the elite drivers in the sport aren't going to necessarily go kamikaze style on the last lap, because if they do that, it's going to become something where they have to pay the piper and your opportunity to win a championship is going to go more or less out the window. You can do it to get into the playoffs, but that's probably as far as it can go. We look at historical examples, Ryan Newman against Kyle Larson. We've seen Kevin Harvick doing that kind of thing at Talladega. But credit to NASCAR for doing the right thing. But from a betting perspective, does this change anything for you, the way you approach some of these drivers? And I guess the logical follow-up, do we think the 22 of Joey Logano still feels he needs to exact his pound of flesh for a little retribution, even though Austin Dillon is going to need a Hail Mary at this point to get himself into the playoffs?
I think from a betting perspective, we still try to handicap green flag races. And, that's the reason the name of this podcast is called Stay Green, is that's what you want. You want the races to play out green. You're not trying to handicap a caution fest. I do think it just gives better drivers a chance at just finishing off these races. And that's what we saw on the restart. We saw a better driver in Joey Logano outduel a fast car, but a faster long run, Austin Dillon. And it'd be really hard to handicap that as part of this. Well, with 2 laps to go, you want to make sure, you have a different driver just in case on a restart. I just don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. But where does NASCAR draw this invisible line? And I want to kind of see what your thoughts. If you go back to Chicago, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, when Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson were racing. Kyle Larson gets into Kyle Busch and then, kind of gets him into the wall. And then Larson looks like he's going to win, but then Kyle Busch drives it into him and does essentially the same thing from maybe not quite as far back as Joey Logano. And is that where NASCAR is going to say, nope, that was egregious? But maybe it wasn't, because Larson initiated the contact on the backstretch. I just don't know. This is a balls and strikes type thing where you do have some opinions or subjectivity to it. I don't know. I think they definitely set a precedent that in the future, you can't just go clean someone out to win. We've seen Logano do it last year at Darlington, but he also felt wronged early in the race or 3 laps earlier. So I don't know. It gets a little murky here. Fortunately, NASCAR did the right thing and let him keep the win. If they were to take the win away, there would have been people bitching about, oh, well, who wins? And then who do you give it to? Who do you give? You give it to Logano? Do you give it to
you vacate it like a college basketball or college football coach that gets absolutely drilled with sanctions. But you're right. I mean, you open a Pandora's box of sorts, and look, I think a lot of us enjoy NASCAR and the brand of racing that we see at the Cup Series. I don't follow racing across the board. I watch Xfinity on a limited basis. I watch trucks a lot less now than I have in the past. I watch F1 where you can't even breathe on another car. So the aggressive component isn't there, but I know you can't pull this kind of stunt in sports car racing and IMSA and a variety of other things. So I'm not going to profess to be an expert for that. What I can tell you is that we all watch sports through one lens or another, and you like it to be officiated through some level of fairness. The problem this creates for NASCAR is, to your point, the invisible line, it's black and white, it's shades of gray. If this happens in the middle of the race and Austin Dillon drives through Joey Logano, I don't know if anybody's paying attention to it. It's definitely not commanding headlines, and is the reason that they decided to still credit Austin Dillon with the win, but take him out of the playoffs. The sum 1 + 1 = 3 that he drives through the back of Logano and he right hooks Denny Hamlin at the end, knowing that right hook, depending on where that's happened in a race, has been grounds for suspension over the last couple of seasons because it's a real safety issue. So I guess that's my problem. My problem isn't that NASCAR decided to do something. My problem is what are they actually punishing and which was the primary infraction?
Yeah, that's a great point.
And so I think they've created, if anything, more ambiguity going forward because we're left going, all right, what was it? Was it the sum of the results? Was it action A? Was it action B? And I get you have to show that you want drivers in some of the younger series that are coming up through the ranks, that this kind of aggressive racing won't be tolerated. It's one thing if you bump a guy at Martinsville to get him out of the groove. It's another when you drive right through him, and then within a split second later, you are coming in trying to clear out the rest of your competition. That's my biggest gripe in all of this, because I think in the moment we wanted something to get done. As NASCAR fans, we wanted there to be some decision made, but I just want to know why the decision was made. Yeah. And I haven't had a chance yet to listen to some of Elton Sawyer's comments. So if he clarified it there, I apologize to our listeners who may have seen or heard that first, but I'm left now going, all right, what did we accomplish here?
Right.
And what are we going to do going forward if history repeats itself?
That's a great point, and that's been overlooked. Was it the Logano issue that caused this? Was it the Denny issue that caused it, or was it just the body of work wrecking the first and third?
A repeat of offender, with the repeat offenses coming within split seconds of one another.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not. I thought my prediction was they were not going to do anything about the Logano, but they were going to penalize him, maybe even suspend him for the right hook on Denny. But they didn't say any of that. It was, we looked at everything and we decided that they don't want that in their sport. And it was, he didn't really get pressed on, well, what's that? Was it wrecking the 22? Was it wrecking the 11? Was it wrecking both of them?
Was it comments on the radio? Like, exactly. Comments on the radio made by the team owner, made by the spotter. Like, what was it?
Denial of something being said on the radio and then saying that it was modified. And then upon hearing that it was on the radio saying, oh, well, then he did a good job. Maybe it is all those things. Maybe it is just, hey, the evidence, for one, I said this, and the amount of people that think that Denny Hamlin just wrecked himself is shocking.
Yeah, I mean, we know we're going to get some of those apologists regardless. And you mentioned at the top, it's the never Denny camp. And it doesn't matter who's driving the 3 car. You can do no wrong when you're put behind the wheel of that iconic car on the track.
I mean, SMT data is DNA at the crime scene. You were there and you did it. You turned left. We saw that. And then you have the spotter apologizing to the 11 team spotter saying, hey, my bad. I told him to wreck you. That's probably why he did it. That's like someone taking the stand and saying, yeah, I helped him bury the body. Like, this is an open and shut case. And there's people that still, even now, after being penalized, are like the never Denny crew, and Denny slid up the track. So you're never going to please anyone or everyone on Twitter. But what a fascinating few days. I even posted, I asked Grok on Twitter
I can't see how anything that you got there from an informational standpoint from the AI vehicle on Twitter, but go ahead. I'm dying to hear this.
These are two of the funny ones. He should have to, they called it the karma cart. For the next race, Dylan's car is replaced with a go-kart, symbolizing his need to start over and learn the basics of racing again. He'd have to navigate the full track in this smaller, slower vehicle. I thought that was great. And then the Dylan Dilemma documentary. NASCAR forces Dylan to star in a documentary where he has to live with a family of Hamlin fans for a month, learning about the impact of his actions on fans and fellow drivers, culminating in a public apology at the next race. I mean, that would be so fun if that's actually what they did.
Now, that's something I would watch, and it might get more eyeballs than what we had for 83, whatever that show was that was ill-fated on USA, where we got to look behind the curtain. So if he had to live in a house with Denny Hamlin, all right, I'm in for that. All right, Grok, you've completely redeemed yourself for some of these ideas.
There's a good chance it's a trailer. Like, I think that Austin Dillon's closet's probably bigger than a lot of houses of fans, right? So I don't know. I think that'd be a hilarious. I thought those were two. There was 10 of them, but those two were just hilarious. So
I mean, if we have creative listeners out there, if they want to put together that trailer using AI, you and I would be more than happy to try and circulate that to create a little bit of a buzz. But to bring it back full circle and not go full sports talk radio here, what does this do from a betting perspective in terms of the way that we approach things? I know, look, when we're handicapping our races over the course of 200 laps, 400 miles, you can't account for the late race variance that inevitably shuffles up the card more often than not. If you've handicapped the race well, it's not going to tip the balance sheet in your favor. So when we're looking at it from a betting standpoint, is there a major takeaway here, or is it just, you know what, this is NASCAR, and, flat out NASCAR is going to NASCAR from time to time?
I would say from a psychological standpoint, just know that in NASCAR, anything can happen. Like in NASCAR, ultimately, they make the say, or they have the final word in this. So if they don't throw a caution with Ryan Preece on the backstretch at Indy, whether there should have been a caution or not, NASCAR didn't throw it. Kyle Larson gets the win. Do not feel like you're a victim or whatever. Or if you had Ryan Blaney or you had something else or you wanted a different outcome, if you had Austin Dillon and you thought that he was just going to cruise to a victory and that someone wasn't going to spin out with 2 to go, no, that's the time when it's going to happen. And I think you just have to, it goes back to the saying is, were you right or were you lucky? I had my biggest bet was Chris Bell to win the race. Was I right? Yeah, probably. I felt like he was a dominant car, but I can't be upset at the way that the race ended. That's going to happen. You're going to have days when things aren't good. So I think just psychologically, you have to tell yourself anything can happen. And until that bet is paid out, whether, and know the rules of every sports book. I think that's one thing you should know is, are you getting graded when they throw the checkered flag and these cars cross, or are you waiting to see what happens after tech? So not only do you need a price shop, I think it's important to understand the actual rules and how each individual sports book will be grading wagers.
I think it's a fair point and an astute observation that every bettor, the longer you're in any particular sport, just when you've seen it all, you haven't even seen a fraction of how these sporting events can end and what it can do to flip your balance sheet from winning to losing. And, sometimes when you're lucky to take a poorly handicapped race and maybe allow you to get out unscathed in terms of avoiding that big red figure on your balance sheet. I did have one other topic I wanted to broach with you. Again, a little bit more sports talk radio, but we can potentially kick it on down the road since I know Daytona will be a little bit lighter. And I think it's a topic that you'll have a passionate stance on that is starting to make its rounds in the motorsports world. And maybe we can help ignite that and pour a little kerosene on the fire if we can set up a head-to-head off-season racing extravaganza between Kyle Larson and Max Verstappen, if the powers that be could align for that. But more on that next week when we have a little bit of fun talking Daytona, since it's not a race that we will heavily bet. All right, Worm, it's the checkered flag time, and we are trying to drive our car into good old victory lane as we wrap up the program around these parts. From a best bet standpoint, we're putting the win streak on the line. What have we found early on in the week that's worth building our race card around as it pertains to seeing these cars before they unload at the track?
I think after, what I've said about all the drivers this week, I don't think it's no surprise that I'm going to be sticking with Bubba Wallace top 10. We're not going to get the same payout we had last week. And by the way, great job making us feel like idiots by getting better numbers than we did. I know there were a lot of people that we posted Bubba plus 120 or plus 130 last week. And I was getting DMs like plus 177 on my site, plus 150 on Bet365. So we
have sharp bettors that are out there, unfortunately for us, and I don't think anyone's going to feel sorry. We have lost some of our better NASCAR outs over the course of multiple seasons in doing this. So yes, we sacrifice a little bit more value from time to time to keep ourselves in business.
Yeah. So I'm going to say Bubba Wallace at plus 100 is for the top 10. That's at Bet365 and FanDuel. I don't hate the minus 120, but I would not pay any more than that. I do think that he has a more than a coin toss's chance of finishing in the top 10. He could maybe even get up there into the top 5. I also don't hate that 25-1 win price. But ultimately, I have not played anything at this point other than Bubba Wallace top 10. So I like that plus 100 at Bet365 and FanDuel.
You may have, listening to you break down some of the drivers, talked me into a head-to-head matchup, but it's not widely available, so I know this will piss off our listeners, but we like to do that anyways. Won't disclose that on the show to try and do that. But yeah, Bubba Wallace has definitely had momentum on his side, and with 2 races where he can make up some serious ground, both at Michigan and Daytona, I'm sure he'd love to do that instead of finding himself up perilously close to the cut line going into the final regular season race at Darlington for the Southern 500. All right, my friend, job well done breaking down your de facto second home track. Will Papa Werme be in attendance for this race? Is he going to make it out there for the track, or no, since you're not flying home to go see it?
No, I don't even know that he knows the race is in Michigan this week. He likes to pop in with his opinions right before the race and tell me what he's betting. So
it's a good luxury to have.
Hilarious.
It's a good luxury to have. He can wait. He can gather all the information. He can aggregate it and regurgitate it accordingly and share it right back with you. Hopefully he bets the right things and knows what drivers, not season-long stuff or anything else along those lines. But to all of our loyal Stay Green listeners, can't thank you enough for the continued support. If you guys have questions, comments, feedback, by all means, tweet at us. Let us know what you'd like to see us incorporate as we get closer to the end of the regular season. Rate, review, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. It goes a long way. Retweet, share as we try and continue to grow our footprint in the NASCAR community. There's a lot of betting content out there, some better than others. We'd like to think that we can help continue to raise the bar and take discussion to the next level. So for Chris Werme, I'm Todd Fuhrman. Best of luck with all of your investments for Michigan International Speedway, but most importantly, with a Bubba Wallace top 10 ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.